Welcome to the Link Online. And once again, we start out with these wonderful images of scenes from across Canada, whether they be the farms on the prairies or Ontario, or the buffalo or the bison in Wood Buffalo National Park, which is, you've done a story on that, Terry.
I'm doing one today.
Oh, there you go. We're
and the Rockies. I want to go to the Rockies.
And the great Canadian flag flapping in the wind there.
Yes, well, it was Canada Day.
Oh, that's right. Yes, absolutely.
That was lovely, Mark. I mean, what an intro. That was really impressive.
Well, that's what they pay me the big bucks.
I know, wow. All off the top of your head.
Okay,
there's not much there. But
introduce everybody. Come
yes,
on.
come on,
well,
come on. On with the show.
Listen, let me introduce you to Terry Haig.
Terry.
Hi,
it's a
Lynn.
pleasure.
Terry Haig.
It's only been, about 40 years, eh?
Yeah, yep.
And this is Lynn Desjardins.
Hello,
Yeah,
Dad.
hey.
And we have in the control room with us today as well Benoit Durand and Marc-André Deschamps, and of course the ever elusive and
There he is.
But who are you?
me.
Yeah, introduce yourself, please.
Please let me introduce myself to Mark Montgomery. There you go.
All right.
And we see we're in short sleeve shirts, Terry and I did, because it's been hot. It's been hot
Actually,
in Canada.
I'm wearing a cami and usually have the shirt off because it's just been brutally hot.
It's been hot. How hot has it been? It's been very hot.
Yes.
But in Europe, they've been having like record-breaking heat, like 40 degrees or something.
Yes. So we shouldn't
degrees.
complain because it hasn't been as hot as Europe.
And as I always like to say, it's 30 plus 30 is a lot better than minus 30, right?
No, I disagree. I don't mind minus 30 with central heating and woolen sweaters. I don't mind minus 30 at all.
But we don't have to shovel anything with plus 30. But at
Shoveling
minus 30,
is good for you. Look at this.
oh boy, Terry, you don't want to weigh in on this?
Terry's making faces at us.
No, listen,
Winter or
I was
summer?
raised south of the border. I don't have that sort of DNA that allows me to, I mean, when it goes, coldness really gets me.
Yeah.
Really?
Gets to me, big time.
Terry,
big
you
time.
need to
So
wear
you
wool.
would-
But it can never be too hot.
Better still, if you wear alpaca, it's the warmest thing. The threads of the alpaca are hollow, so they trap air. And it is, I'm telling you, the warmest thing that you will ever wear. And you will never be cold if you have alpaca and you keep moving.
Wow, okay, I didn't know that.
Yes, I
All
wear
these
wool
years.
socks too, wool socks.
Oh, I wear wool socks.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Alpaca sweater.
Moving right along, let's say hello to our friends at World Radio Paris and the shortwave service from Germany and Cowrie 97.5 FM radio in Nigeria. And on the program today, lots of interesting things, not necessarily the heavy stuff that we sometimes get into, heavy topics. We have, for example, your story today, Lynn.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you about a new study that shows students who take classes in instrumental music have better academic performance.
All right, Terry.
You know, I've got a good news story, too, about a couple of guys in Nova Scotia that really are doing something about the glut of plastic water bottles. They built a house out of it.
Oh, my goodness.
Well,
Hopefully
amazing.
that will withstand the cold.
It will withstand the cold. They've already done a lot of tests on it. It's going to be amazing. I mean, they used 612,000 plastic bottles. I mean, it was crunched.
Yeah.
But imagine if houses were built to that. I mean, there would not be 612,000 bottles in a whale's stomach or in the bottom of the ocean or on beaches or in landfills.
Okay, save it for later. Save it for
You're
later.
right.
Don't leave it in the clubhouse. I know. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Actually,
Well,
you're
I thought-
coming up first, so he could.
Well, no, because I have to say what I'm
Okay,
going to
say
say.
what you're
go
going to
ahead,
say.
say
Say
it.
what you're going to say.
Well, what are your biggest concerns? They did a poll of Canadians, 4,000 across the country, and they said, "What is your biggest concern?" You've got the environment, and you've got all kinds of other things, crime, and so on and so forth. What is your biggest concern? And Canadians' biggest concern
Don't
was
tell us. Make them come back for it.
okay. Come
All
back
right.
for that.
Okay.
All right,
That's right.
that's coming up in just a moment here on the Link Online. All right, Terry, we're going to get to your story about recycling, and this is, in fact, a pretty good story. It's, well, as you mentioned, we heard a lot about plastic these days and all the stuff that's going into the ocean and landfills and so on and so forth. This is a better news story, how to keep that from getting into the oceans and so on.
Yeah, I just gave you a hint of what it's about. What's going on? I mean, this house it's a beach house. Okay. It's constructed with recycling aluminum, wood, and drywall. Okay, it's sort of semi-traditional, but It's made with slabs from recycled polyethylene terephthalate, okay? So what happened to those PET bottles, okay, that were reduced to pellets, injected with gas that turned them into foam, that was shaped into panels. Now, you're going to be tested, Montgomery. This is up your alley, Montgomery. Used to build the walls, which provide both structural strength and insulation. This is your type of thing.
Actually, absolutely, yes.
So I spoke with David Saunier. He is the partner. He's partners with Joel German to tell me about the process of building this incredible house.
All right, let's hear it.
We used 100% recycled PET plastic, which is water bottles and fizzy drink bottles, pop bottles, whatever. It's all made with the same plastic. And we reached out to a company that I knew from my boat building world called Armacell. They're out of Brampton, Ontario, and they sold us the raw product, which is 100% recycled PET plastic. And what we did with it, we trimmed it down, shaped it up, designed our laminate schedules for each side of the panel. It's panel construction. So we basically laminated these panels and engineered them to build a 2,000 square foot beach house. I have a lot of experience in building in composites and fiberglass and different panels and that sort of thing. So I realized that if I used 100% recycled material like pop bottles, I knew that I could engineer laminates, which is fiberglass and resin, to put on each side of this thing and create a panel with it strong enough to build a house with it.
Wow.
And so I thought, you know what? If we're going to do this, why not use a recycled product and help turn this thing around that we call, global warming and the environment issues we're having with plastics at the moment. So we were able to take effectively 612,000 bottles that it took to make our panels out of the oceans and landfills.
It's amazing.
By turning them into composite panels and building a beach house. So in a nutshell, that's basically what we did. From concept to finished product took us less than a year. So we're really, really happy with the end result. We're really, really happy that we were able to think outside the box, not to pat ourselves too hard on the back here, because we're not really used to doing that too much.
Right.
But we came up with the concept, and within a year we were able to finish the product. And there it is, a gorgeous 2,000 square foot beach house. Personally, I thought it was our duty to try to use recycled materials since we were going to be making panels. I thought, you know what? I got a 9-year-old daughter. I worry about what it's going to be like for her in the future all the time on a lot of different things. And one of them is with all the plastic waste that's floating around in the oceans and in the landfills. And I'm thinking, what can I do to maybe change a little bit of it? So if we have one house built with over 500,000 bottles, you can imagine if 10,000 homes worldwide were built, or even more.
Well, that was part of my conversation with David Saunier, one half of the team that built that beach house that you just saw down in Nova Scotia out of over 600,000 recycled plastic bottles. Now, I've been doing a couple of plastic stories this week. A recent study prepared for Environment Canada showed that in 2016, Canadians threw out 3.3 million tons of plastic a year, 12 times more than is recycled. The federal government says Canadians will throw away an estimated $11 billion worth of plastic materials annually by 2013. And where do those discarded plastics go? About 150 million tons are dumped yearly in the world's oceans. And I was talking to a guy in another story, 400 billion water bottles are used every year. I mean, it's madness.
Oh, it certainly is madness. I'm a little bit dismayed at our own organization, because this is an organization full of journalists who report on this stuff constantly, and yet you still see plastic water bottles here.
Oh, I don't even use coffee cups. I always bring my own mug to the coffee joint upstairs.
No, but when they have these meetings here, you get people around the table, they bring
Oh,
in
yeah.
like a dozen or, a couple of dozen of these plastic water bottles and things. Like, come on, there's fountains all over the building,
Yeah.
Fill up a glass jug with water and a couple
Well,
of ice cubes. And,
to the company's credit, though, the corporation did, remember last year, they had a giveaway of glass bottles for employees. So you could actually go and pick up a glass bottle. So we're all supposed to be using those glass
yeah,
bottles.
but that still doesn't change the fact that,
That
when
they
have
bring
these,
in the
they bring in
plastic.
these,
Yeah.
for these meetings.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's true.
So that's a little bit of a finger pointing.
But you're a technically proficient fellow. This looks like a great idea, right?
Well, it sounds like a great idea because as I was looking at that, I was saying those things seem to be about this thick, and I thought, in terms of insulation value,
Sure.
they'd be pretty darn good. And also, because it's plastic, it'd be a vapor barrier at the same time. Because when you build houses now, you have to build vapor barriers in there to prevent the transmission of moisture.
Yep.
So it sounds. But you brought up another good point as well, which is questions about flammability.
Yeah.
So hopefully the house will never catch on fire, because if that was the case, then this stuff might possibly release all kinds of toxic
Well,
chemicals.
what the building materials they use now release all kinds of toxic fumes, which is a whole other story because firemen have higher rates of cancer than anybody else. So that's a whole other very important issue that is not being dealt with sufficiently, in my view.
Nevertheless, it sounds like a really good
Yeah,
idea.
it
Boy,
does.
it'd be great if it works, eh?
So are there links to these people's
Yeah,
websites
it's
and
all
stuff?
there. It's all there.
All right. So we'll have-
RCInet.ca.
Dot net.
coming up, the benefits of music. There you go. The benefits of music, and there was a wonderful musical interlude there. Don't
Yep.
you wish
Is
you
that
could
Oscar
play-
Peterson?
I don't know, but it kind of sounds like
We
it.
have the
Yes.
rights to him, right?
Yeah.
RCI. Remember on our show that we
Oh,
used
yeah,
to go
sure,
on the
yeah.
radio with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But now the story is that learning music and being able to have a musical sense is good for you.
Well, specifically, Mark, instrumental music classes in school. Now, this was a study from the University of British Columbia. It did not prove that learning an instrument in school will make you a better student, but those who did take this kind of class apparently did have better test results in several subjects. So I spoke with one of the authors of the study, Professor Peter Guzouassis.
We were most surprised to find that students in the present study who were highly engaged in instrumental music were, on average, over 1 year ahead in their mathematics, English, and science skills compared to those peers not engaged in school music. It was also surprising for us to see such a consistency across diverse domains, English, science, and math. Also, such substantive effect sizes even after we controlled for important individual differences such as gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, and prior achievement in grade 7 numeracy and literacy examinations offered across all of British Columbia. Also, we were surprised to see an evidence of what is called a dose-response type pattern, with higher engagement in music and higher academic achievement. And also, we found this clear trend showing more pronounced associations with instrumental music relative to vocal music.
So you found a link, but did you find proof that the music classes cause the better academic performance?
Well, we can't say cause, but we can say that it predicted the better performance across the mathematics, science, and English in grade 10 provincial exams and in grade 12 English exams. So this was not a pure experiment, so we can't say that there was cause, but we can, because of the type of analyses we did, say that music achievement predicts academic achievement and not the other way around.
So what do you conclude from your results?
While we may not fully understand the mechanisms of how music learning transfers to the areas of development that we look at, our current work and numerous studies that we cite suggest that an extended engagement with music learning, particularly instrumental music, enhances all of the areas that we looked at, from something called executive functions to socio-personal or socio-emotional development, also to motivation-related development, and also the neuroscience, the brain development research that we looked at as well.
So based on that, I guess you would recommend music classes.
Well, specifically, I would recommend instrumental music. And the earlier that children can start learning how to play an instrument and engaging with things like learning how to read notation, learning how to practice, learning how to perform not only alone, but with other people in an ensemble, all of these things contribute to this kind of development that we're looking at.
So that was Peter Guzouassis. He had a lot more to say about the study, so you can hear the whole interview if you go to our website. You know, this comes at a time, of course, when we have terrific budget cuts in schools, and so many of the schools are cutting out music classes. And if you want to do it privately, it's really quite expensive, so not everybody can afford to. But Mr. Guzouassis, they're telling us that there appear to be definite benefits. There are a lot of other studies, but, nothing really definitive in finding a causal link, but certainly they seem to find that kids who do have the benefit of music classes do better.
Well, even if there's not proof that it can help, it certainly can't hurt, right?
Well, the kids who are forced to go to lessons might argue with that, because not all the kids like it.
No, but how many times we heard it here just a moment ago with Terry when he was talking, and he said, he started lessons and he quit because he didn't like it, but now he wishes he had continued.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, it's the same with a lot of us. Later on, geez, I wish I had continued.
Well,
I wish I had learned to play that.
I think this is a debate that parents, face, and to what extent you push your kids to do things. Another thing I pushed my poor child to do was to learn how to skate. And yes, I sent her off to skating classes. It's very cute. They dress the kids up in little outfits and they make them jump. And she, at the time, did not like it. But then when she became a teenager, she said, buy me figure skates. I want to do figure skating. And then she was very happy that I had pushed her in that direction. So
I have a theory about
choice.
skating, actually. Here's the deal. It's where kids learn to not trust their parents ever again. Because when you're learning to skate and you fall, it hurts. And then your father or mother comes over and says, come on, that doesn't hurt. And you know damn well it does hurt. And they're lying to you. It all goes downhill from there. No wonder Canadians are dysfunctional. But it's true.
Okay, let's not get into Canadians being dysfunctional.
But I mean, skating hurts. Learning to skate hurts.
We're going to start talking about how Americans are dysfunctional, and we don't want to go
they
there
don't skate.
because we got to get to Mark's story.
Okay.
I kind of like this actually. But look at what we've produced in terms of skating. That wonderful couple that won the
Barbara Ann, all the way back to Barbara Ann Scott. Never mind that Sonia Henny girl
Scott
from Norway.
Moyer
Yeah.
and Tessa Virtue. If you haven't seen them skating, you have to go online, go on YouTube, and watch them. Fantastic.
Well, let's not forget Henri Richard. He could skate a little bit.
Oh, hockey. Well, it's hockey.
Hey, Pierre?
The
He's
Rocket.
got his
And
indulgence.
the Rocket wasn't that great a skater, except from the blue line in. His brother Maurice.
Well, you would know because you're the sports guy.
Well, I would know because I saw Rocket Richard score a hat trick one night at Madison Square Garden when I was about 8 years old.
Okay.
You see, well, hockey runs deep. I could tell you the story about my mother going to a hockey game and some guy in front of her yelling because the Rocket was known for taking dives, right? And the guy said, or was it the Rocket? And one of them was known for taking dives. Anyway, some guy said, lève-toi, papa, saying, get up, grandpa. And my mother apparently hit him over the head with her purse.
The guy insulted the Rocket. You didn't do that in Quebec, boy.
So what it is hockey is, of course, a big concern for Canadians.
Yes.
But see how smoothly
Transition.
Oh, you're making a transition
The
now.
segue.
Okay, what are you segueing
This is
into
a
here,
segue.
Mark?
What are Canadians' biggest concerns?
Oh,
Well,
beautiful, Mark,
Getting up
beautiful.
from falling after skating.
Well.
I would say.
they did a survey. The CBC did a survey of over
Survey that keeps on giving.
That's right. They surveyed over 4,000 Canadians, and they said, as part of this big survey, they said, what are your main concerns? And of course, there's a lot of stuff in the news about climate issues and lots of stuff about crime and gang violence and stuff. But the biggest concern, apparently, for Canadians was the cost of living. And so I wanted to explore this a little bit further. So I spoke to Professor Ian Lee, who is an economist and professor of management at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University in Ottawa. And I asked him if he was surprised at this survey result.
When I read through the CBC report, the issues of concern just leapt off the page, so to speak. And I mean by that, the first one was accommodation. And what could be more, important to most people than can I make my mortgage payment or my rent payment? I mean, that's where you live, literally. And in a couple of cities, we know Toronto and Vancouver, and they're very large cities, and they're facing truly astronomical costs of accommodation. But it's not just in Toronto and Vancouver. In other cities, it's not as acute, but it's still significant for a young person setting out. And then I looked at the other categories of concern. One was utility bills, which of course means electricity, and your heating bills in the wintertime. And most cities in Canada, in Ottawa and Montreal and the other major cities, heating is not a trivial issue. In January, when it can be minus 25 or minus 30, or sometimes if you go into northern cities, it can be minus 35 or 45. So that's not trivial. And then the third one listed, cited, were groceries, and the final one of note was childcare for those whose children are not yet in school. Well, none of them are what I call discretionary items. It's not like going to a restaurant where if you don't have the money, well, you can just postpone it and go another time in, 6 months or something. These are essential. You've got to pay your rent every month or your mortgage payments. You've got to pay your utility bills. You've got to buy your groceries. That's what struck me, is that these are very pressing and very immediate. Not to trivialize climate change, but while it's very real, it's not as immediately pressing in a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month sense. And so I thought it was perfectly understandable.
But what is the state of the economy? We've had the government saying that unemployment is very, very low. The economy is booming. But I guess people don't seem to think the same as what the government is saying.
Right. I mean, that's the paradox. And now we're really talking about what I like to call the macro and the micro. Micro is us individually living our day-to-day lives, and the macro is the aggregated stats. And by any objective measure, Canada is just doing extraordinarily well. But there is a gap between the macro and the micro.
But there has been a recent study that showed, for example, 80% of Toronto residents say they'll never be able to afford a home there. And there have been other studies, surveys, national surveys, one for the Privy Council of Canada just a couple of years ago, that echoed the same concerns. Canadians generally feel that their children will not do as well as they have done. They fear for their future. Then job security is always a touchy issue in this changing economy and so on. So I guess people are sort of feeling, again, a much different micro situation, as you put it, than the macro situation, which these figures seem to indicate.
Right. The boomers and above are very, very well off. The millennials are the ones who are struggling. Their jobs are precarious, and they're overwhelmingly, they want to live in bigger cities, and the bigger cities have the most acute housing problems.
Well, Professor Ian Lee, let me just get you to sum up in a couple of sentences then where you think the Canadian economy is going, or what is the most concerning about it.
Well, there's two. One's more immediate, and that's the longevity of this recovery. This is the longest recovery in Canadian history. Right now, the one we're living through is about 10 years old. The average recovery is around 5 to 6 years old. So that suggests that in the near future, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, we're going to be going into another recession because we haven't been in one for 10 years, and they do return. The more serious issue, I think, in the medium term and beyond that is the entire cost of climate change. I mean, we've seen the wildfires out west. We've seen the flooding, and the costs are going up, and they're going up very significantly. And we simply do not yet know because we don't have enough data. The data comes in every year to the insurance companies, and the actuarialists and the statisticians crunch the numbers, but we really don't yet know where it's going to go in terms of the full cost. But I think it's going to be significantly more than we anticipate it to be.
Okay, so that was an excerpt of my conversation with Professor Ian Lee of Carleton University in Ottawa about this survey showing Canadians' main concern was the cost of living, in spite of all these other very important things. So I don't know about you, but that's concern to me. I mean, we have, the cost of living, the inflation rate is about 2% roughly, which is pretty low, except salaries have been very low as well. There hasn't been an
Certainly
increase.
lower than 2%.
Yeah, I mean, our own salary here at the building here, we are below the rate of inflation. So we're actually going backwards now.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, it's not my fault after all. I thought.
Well, I'm very concerned about, about that, but also, as he said, the millennials. Never mind trying to buy a property. It's got to the point where you cannot rent a property because the housing stock has been bought up by corporations for Airbnb.
Just what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Just exactly what I was thinking.
In Montreal and the province of Quebec, we've gone from a vacancy rate that was over 3% now to 1.3 approximately. And you see it. We had in the news, it was moving day. For some reason, they've... In the province of Quebec, July 1st is moving day. That's another story of why that is. But they had a story about how many families were on the street because they simply could not find affordable housing.
Oh, no, it's awful. And here's the other thing, is that I rode down to work the other day with a young lady that works here. And I said, I didn't know her. And I said, are you on staff? He said, are you serious? Nobody goes on staff anymore.
No, they don't
Contract.
hire permanent
They don't
employees.
hire people.
Contract.
It's contracts.
Yeah.
So does that affects benefits, right? Or
Well, you don't, yeah.
There's no retirement plan necessarily. There's no benefits.
To be fair, in our building, you get a certain percentage of your salary in lieu of benefits. But this is a much broader problem. Those millennials are not getting nearly the kind of full-time jobs with benefits, with vacation. So many of them are working as freelancers, and you'll get these businesses that say, oh, but they like it. They like it. But the fact is, they like it until they get sick or until they realize they have no pension, which comes much later. And, then they have to struggle to go on vacation.
Well, the other aspect of it is, of course, as you mentioned, the high rent cost, for example, because most of these young people are renting.
Yeah.
And the cost is so high that they can't save for an eventual retirement or anything else for that matter, because you're paying like up to 50% of your income in some cases.
And more.
Do we have big tuition costs in Canada? I mean,
Yes.
you're more acquainted because you have
what?
a daughter that
In the
gets...
province of Quebec, they're quite reasonable.
Okay.
You can get a first-year university admission if you're a Canadian. If you're a Quebec resident, it's more if you're from outside, and way more if you're from outside of the country. But it's, I think, about $3,500 now. Outside of Quebec, it's more like $5,000 and upwards yearly.
Okay, so but I'm talking about
But it's much more
the debt
reasonable.
from that, like in the States, it's phenomenal.
Oh, well, the tuitions are nothing compared to what they are in the United States. But kids are still going into debt unless they're lucky enough to have parents who pay for their tuition. Kids are still going into debt. So that's another expense on top of the housing and everything else, and they haven't got a full-time job.
Well, the other thing, of course, is when we were young and you started out in your first job, you got an apartment, you had your own apartment, but you can't do that now. You have to share it with three or four
Yes.
co-renters because the price of the places are just so expensive that you cannot possibly afford that on your basically starting career salary.
Or you go back and stay with your parents.
As is.
That happens an awful lot.
A friend of it's a friend of mine. The son just came home because he can't afford the apartment anymore. He was sharing it with co-renters, and a couple of them moved out. And he said, I can't stay here. I can't afford the place. So he's moved back with his parents.
Is this all legislatable at some point?
Well, you know what? As far as I can tell, governments, I don't know when they're going to wake up to these issues. They are very slow to act. They are still very much influenced by large corporations and by the interests.
Way to put it, yes.
Yeah. And, they talk a lot about housing and so on, and certainly we have an election coming up in October 2019, and there will be discussion, but we'll see which party actually is elected and whether it translates into action.
Well, I know we have the current government spending billions and billions in deficit spending, but it doesn't seem to have improved anything in the economy over the last 4 years. We're still
the
struggling,
economy hasn't tanked though.
No,
so
the economy.
the numbers are good.
That guy
the
was up
macro, as your guy said.
Yeah, the macro's fine, but on an individual basis, I don't know anybody who's doing exceptionally well. Anyway, we're almost
to
out of
go.
time here, so we'll have to say goodbye for this edition of the show. We should mention that we're not going to have a show in the coming weeks for summer. We're going to take a summer break. There will be interesting stuff on the website to look at. So for Terry and Lynn and Benoit and Marc-André, I'm Mark Montgomery. Take care until next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.